It is the morning of the battle, and the most expensive thing you own is standing quietly in the dark, breathing. 4 tons of it. Armored in 8,000 plates of steel, blades fitted to the tusks, a tower on its back. Now look at the man standing at its shoulder. He is carrying a hammer and a chisel. Not for the enemy, for your elephant. He knows exactly where to put it. The soft hollow at the base of the skull, where the spine goes into the head. One swing, if the animal turns. Livy records the tool in the kit of Hasdrubal's drivers. Standard issue. Carried onto the field the way a modern crew carries a fire extinguisher, not because they expect a fire, but because the thing they are operating is known to catch. Sit with that for a second, because it is the whole business in one image. The most valuable single asset in your entire army walks onto the field accompanied by a man whose job description includes destroying it. Nobody carries a chisel for a horse. So before you get to tactics, before you get to the moment the line breaks and the enemy runs, you have to answer a much duller question. What did it cost to get that animal to stand in that spot on that morning? And the answer is not a purchase price. There isn't really a purchase price. The answer is a schedule of obligations that started years before the battle and does not stop the day after it. On the outside, the war elephant looks like the ancient world's most decisive weapon, a moving wall that ends the argument before the infantry even close. On the inside, it is a 4-ton animal that produces nothing at all for 49 days out of 50 and cannot be switched off. That gap is where the entire subject lives, and it is much wider than people expect, because the elephant does not care that it is peacetime. It does not eat less in winter quarters. It does not eat less because your treasury is empty, or because the campaign was cancelled, or because you lost. The cost side of this ledger runs on the animal's biology. The revenue side runs on somebody else's decision to fight you, and the outcomes fork 3 ways. Some elephant programs genuinely paid. They bought their owners a result no other arm of the army could have bought, and the result was worth more than the decades of forage that went into it. Some quietly bled their states for generations, an expense line that outlived every king who authorized it. And some destroyed the very army that was paying for them, on the day, in the first 10 minutes, in front of everyone. By the end of this, you will know which kind you were buying, and more usefully, you will know which one you could tell apart in advance. Because the operators at the time mostly could not. You feed it every day. It fights one afternoon. Now, owning a war elephant is one of those phrases that covers at least 3 completely different businesses, and they do not have the same cost structure at all. Not slightly different. Structurally different, in the way that owning a vineyard and owning a wine shop are different. The first business is the forest kingdom. This is the Mauryan model, and it is the original one. Your capital cost is not an animal, it is an institution. You maintain elephant forests as protected crown land. You staff them with wardens and boundary guards, and men whose entire profession is slipping a noose around a wild elephant's leg, and you run a department of state with a superintendent at the top of it. Kautilya's Arthashastra lays the whole thing out with the enthusiasm of a man who has never met a process he didn't want to write down. The stable dimensions, the ration schedule, the rank structure, the penalty for killing a protected elephant. Under this model, the marginal cost of your next elephant is 1 expedition into land you already control. The heavy cost was paid upstream, in territory and administration, and it is invisible on the day of the battle. The second business is the importer. This is Ptolemaic Egypt. This is Carthage. This is any Hellenistic king who wanted the weapon and did not happen to be sitting on the habitat. Here you cannot capture your way to a core, because there is no core scale supply within reach. So you buy a supply chain instead. You found hunting stations 1,000 kilometers down a hostile coast. You design a class of ship that does not otherwise exist, because normal hulls cannot take the weight or the shallow water. You cut roads across desert. You hire foreign personnel on foreign terms because the skill does not exist domestically. Every single elephant that reaches your parade ground carries a freight bill, and the freight bill is bigger than the animal. The third business is the renter. You do not own elephants. You field somebody else's allied contingents. Tribute animals, a Numidian prince's beasts attached to your line for 1 season. Rome did this. Cheapest possible access to the effect. No forage obligation in peacetime. No stables. No payroll. It is also the only version where you have no control whatsoever over the thing standing in front of your own infantry and no pipeline when it dies. We are going to talk about the second one, the importer. Partly because it is the version where every cost becomes visible. The Forest Kingdom's expenses are buried in land tenure and a millennium of custom, while the importer has to build every piece of the machine in the open, on a budget, in one lifetime, and you can watch him do it. and partly because the importer is the one who eventually quits. And the reason he quits turns out to be the most interesting thing in this entire subject. So, entry cost. Start with the animal, which is the cheapest part, and which you cannot manufacture. You are not breeding these. Nobody in antiquity is breeding these at scale. And once you see the numbers, you understand why nobody tried. An elephant reaches adulthood at around 17 years. Gestation runs 18 to 22 months. A cow will not typically mate again until her calf is weaned 4 or 5 years later. Run that through any planning horizon a king actually has, and it collapses. You would be feeding an animal for the better part of 2 decades before it could carry anything heavier than its own boredom. The historian Thomas Troutman puts it bluntly: raising elephants from birth was uneconomic, which is precisely why the entire practice, for 3,000 years, was built on capturing adults out of the wild. You are not a breeder. You are a harvester of something you did not grow, which means, if you are Ptolemy, you need a place to harvest. So around 270 to 264 BC, a man named Eumetis goes south for Ptolemy II and founds a settlement on the Red Sea coast with the wonderfully unembarrassed name of Ptolemaeus of the Hunts. And that is not a fort, it is a terminal. Behind it comes the rest of the machine, the ports at Berenike, at Philotera, at Arsinoe. Roads cut across the eastern desert, so the animals could be walked inland toward the Nile. Wells and depots and garrisons along a coast with nothing else on it. And the ships a purpose-built class the Greeks called elephantagoi, elephant carriers, broad-beamed and shallow-drafted, timed to the seasonal winds that would push them north between October and May. Stop and count what that is. To acquire a weapon system, a state built a coastline. Not a factory, a coastline. Towns, harbors, roads, a bespoke merchant marine, and a permanent standing operation in a place no Egyptian had any other reason to be. And you have not yet armored anything. Here the evidence gets thinner and stranger, and I want to be straight about it. The only complete suit of elephant armor that survives anywhere in the world sits in the Royal Armories in Leeds, a Bargustavan I pill, made in India around 1600, which is roughly 18 centuries after the battles we have been talking about. It is not what a Ptolemaic elephant wore, but it is the only object anyone ever built that tells you what this obligation looks like when it is made physical, and the numbers are worth hearing. 5,840 plates survive. Complete, it carried something like 8,500. 118 kilos as it stands, around 159 when whole. 8,000 plates, hammered, pierced, linked, fitted, for one animal. And when that animal dies, the suit fits nothing else. Then the tusk swords, paired blades socketed onto the tusks, a real weapon type with real survivors, of which the entire known world total today is 4 pairs and 1 orphan. Then the tower and its crew. Then the drivers? And we will come back to the drivers, because they are the part of this that ends up mattering most. The listed price of an elephant, in other words, is the smallest number in this story by an order of magnitude. It might be the only number that never gets written down at all. Now, here is the mechanism underneath all of it, and it is one mechanism, not 3. Because the thing that makes this asset behave so strangely is a single mismatch, and everything else in the subject is a consequence of it. The cost of a war elephant is biological. The value of a war elephant is informational. Take those one at a time. The cost runs on the animal's clock, and the animal's clock does not consult you. Elephants eat something over 1.5% of their body weight per day, every day. The working estimates for a large adult land, somewhere between 135 and 300 kilograms of vegetation, plus water in quantities that create their own separate logistical problem. To feel the scale, put it next to the animal your quartermaster already understands. The standard barley ration for a Roman cavalry horse was 7 kilos a day. A big bull elephant needs 15 to 30 times that. When the Seleucids brought 54 elephants to Magnesia, the historian Brett Devereaux estimates they may have consumed as much as 1,000 cavalrymen, that is 1,000 riders, 1,000 horses, and 1,000 grooms to tend them. 54 animals, eating like an entire wing of an army that isn't there. And they eat that on the march, in camp, in winter quarters, in years when there is no war at all, for a working life that can run 4 or 5 decades. Now the other side, what does all that buy? It buys a moment. Specifically, it buys the moment when troops who have not trained against elephants meet elephants. The shock is real, and it is genuinely decisive. Men break, horses refuse, formations that took a generation to build come apart in 90 seconds because a wall arrived that arrows did not stop. Nobody is exaggerating that effect. It happened, repeatedly, and it won battles. But look closely at what is actually being purchased there. You are not buying force. 4 tons of muscle cannot outfight a cohesive infantry line that has decided not to run. You are buying the enemy's unfamiliarity. And unfamiliarity is the one asset in the world that you destroy by using. The Romans meet elephants for the first time in 280 BC, and it goes very badly for them. Within 5 years, they have a working answer. Within a lifetime, it is doctrine. Leave lanes in the formation so the animals have somewhere to go. Put light infantry with javelins in those lanes, make an enormous amount of noise, and target the drivers. That is not a secret weapon. That is a checklist. And once the checklist exists, it is copied by everyone who fights you, and it never stops existing. So, the value of your elephant corps depreciates not gradually, not on a schedule you can plan around, but as a function of how often anyone has seen one. It is at maximum the first time, and declines every time thereafter. Meanwhile, the forage requirement does not move a single kilogram. You feed it every day, it fights one afternoon, and each afternoon it fights, the next one is worth less. Which brings us to the trap, the one every importing state walks into, because on paper it looks like the smart move. You look at your supply chain, the coast, the ships, the foreign instructors on foreign wages, and you notice you are paying an enormous premium for a package. And you think, I don't need the package. I need the animal. There are elephants far closer than India. Let me capture locally, train locally, and skip the import bill entirely. Perfectly rational. It is also where the Ptolemaic Corps met the Seleucid Corps at Raphia in 217 BC, and came apart. Polybius gives Ptolemy 73 elephants against Antiochus's 102, and the Ptolemaic animals, on the left, broke before contact, and ran back through their own infantry, which is a distinction worth pausing on. They did not lose a fight, they declined to have one, and then damaged the people who had paid for them. Polybius explains this by size. African elephants were smaller, and were frightened of the Indian ones. For 2,000 years, that explanation held, and it is repeated in most accounts you will read today. It is probably wrong. In 2014, a genetic study of the surviving elephant population in Eritrea, the region those Ptolemaic animals came from, found they were not the small forest species everyone had assumed. They were savanna elephants, which are the largest land animals alive, and are not smaller than Indian elephants at all. So the tidy explanation collapses, and what is left standing is far more expensive. If it was not the animals, it was everything around the animals, the capture, the conditioning, the years of training, and the men doing it. The Ptolemies had bought the cheaper half of the package and skipped the half that was actually load-bearing. You can see the shape of what they skipped in a single word. In Hellenistic Greek, the word Indoi-Indians quietly stopped meaning a nationality and started meaning a job. An elephant driver, any elephant driver, eventually, whatever he actually was. The profession was so completely an import that the trade name never came off it. That is the cheapest lesson in this whole subject. You can ship the animal. The institution behind the animal is not cargo, which brings us down a layer, to the costs nobody quotes you, and they get worse as you go. First screw, there is exactly one supplier, and you cannot become one. We have covered why breeding doesn't work 17 years to adulthood. Gestation approaching 2 years. Cows out of the pool for half a decade at a time. The consequence is that every replacement elephant, forever, has to be taken out of habitat somebody controls. That is not a market with competitive pressure. That is a monopoly with weather. And when the price of that monopoly ever actually got recorded, it was startling. In 305 BC, Seleucus settled with Chandragupta Maurya by handing over Kabul, Herat, and Kandahar, the eastern edge of his empire, 3 satrapies, and took home 500 war elephants. Some sources say 480. Either way, it is the only price for war elephants that history clearly wrote down, and it was not paid in coin. It was paid in provinces. Second screw. The asset dictates its own infrastructure, and then periodically becomes a liability inside it. The Arthashastra specifies stables built twice as broad and twice as high as the length of the animal, with planked floors and drainage, and a daily ration measured out like a temple, offering grain, oil, ghee, salt, and something on the order of 6.5 baras of grass. You are not housing this thing in an existing building, you are building for it. And then, every year, your adult bulls go into must, a hormonal cycle that raises testosterone for months at a stretch and turns a trained animal aggressive, unpredictable, and disobedient. Modern keepers with sedatives and steel find bulls in must very difficult to manage. You have rope, chain, and a man with a chisel. You pay the full running cost of the asset during the exact period when the asset would kill you. Third screw, and this is the one that never lets go: payroll. The elephant does not come with a driver, it comes with a department. The Indian texts name them individually: the doctor, the trainer, the driver, the man who chains the feet, the grass cutter, the forest guards, the noosemen. One modern estimate puts a fully crewed elephant at around the supply cost of 12 cavalrymen and their horses. And while that figure is a reconstruction rather than a document, the direction is not in doubt. And here is the escalation. That payroll is at its most expensive precisely when the elephant is doing nothing. Nobody is feeding fewer animals in peacetime. Nobody is dismissing the drivers, because the drivers are the least replaceable component in the entire system. The animal answers to one man over years, and if you lose him, you do not have a spare. You have 4 tons of unemployed muscle and a chisel. Now let me show you the same asset class in 2 different years, because the whole argument lives in the distance between them. Good year, Ipsus, 301 BC. Seleucus arrives with something like 400 elephants, the interest, so to speak, on that Indian settlement, and does not use them to charge anything. He uses them as a wall. Demetrius takes his cavalry off on a successful pursuit, wins his corner of the field, and turns to come back, and he cannot. There is a line of elephants standing between him and the battle, and horses will not go near them. The best cavalry force on the field is simply removed from the equation by animals that never closed with an enemy. Antigonus, 81 years old, and the last man who might have put Alexander's empire back together, is killed. The map of the ancient world is redrawn that afternoon. That is the good year. That is what the ledger is buying. Bad year, Zama, 202 BC. Hannibal has 80 elephants and puts them in front. Scipio has read the checklist. He arranges his maniples with lanes running straight through, fills the lanes with skirmishers, and instructs the entire army to make as much noise as it possibly can. The horns and trumpets go up. Polybius says some of the elephants became unmanageable and rushed back into the Numidian cavalry on Hannibal's own left wing. Livy's account has the same picture. The rest found the lanes, took the path of least resistance exactly as intended, and ran out the back of the Roman army into open ground, having achieved nothing. Same weapon, 100 years apart. In one, it decides who inherits Alexander. In the other, it disorders the wing of the greatest commander of the age before the infantry have even engaged. Now, I should be fair here, because the elephants always backfired has become its own lazy story, and it isn't true. Ipsus is real. Elephants broke real lines for real centuries. But notice what Ipsus actually required. 400 animals, deployed by a man who had access to the pipeline, used for a job no charge could do. That is not a weapon you buy. That is a weapon you have to already be a certain kind of state to hold. And that gap between Ipsus and Zama, that is not variance you can manage. That is the product. Let it land. So, if this were a matter of skill, you would expect the best operator to come out fine. He does not. Take Pyrrhus of Epirus, who understood this weapon better than any commander west of the Indus. He is not a tourist. He brings elephants to Italy in 280 BC and beats a Roman army at Heraclea with them. He does it again the following year at Asculum. 2 victories over the most stubborn military culture in the Mediterranean, using an arm the Romans had literally never seen, handled correctly, at the right moment, on ground he chose. And then Beneventum, 275, where the Romans have had 5 years to think about it, and the elephants are turned back into his own line by missiles and noise, and he goes home. The thing to understand about Pyrrhus is that he did not lose because he was outfought. He lost because of where he was standing. Every elephant he had was on the wrong side of the Adriatic from any possible replacement. Every one that died at Beneventum, or in the crossing, or of the ordinary attrition of a long campaign, was gone permanently. No expedition could refill the core, because there was no forest within reach and no state pipeline to draw on. Rome, meanwhile, was losing men it could replace within a season. His name became the word we use for a victory that costs more than the ground it wins. That is not a coincidence. That is a man who priced his own asset correctly on the battlefield and could not price the supply chain behind it, and the second one is the one that finishes you. I will flag, honestly, that most of what we know about Pyrrhus comes through Roman and Greek accounts, written by people invested in the outcome, and Beneventum in particular is thinner in the sources than its reputation suggests. But the structural point doesn't rest on the details of one afternoon. It rests on a fact nobody disputes. He could not get more. So here is the question that has been sitting underneath all of this. If the war elephant was this marginal, if it broke its own lines often enough that drivers carried a tool for killing it, if the counter-tactics were a checklist any competent army could learn in 5 years, if a single animal ate like 30 horses, then why did anyone keep buying? These were not sentimental men. Rome tried elephants, evaluated them, and largely declined. China, which had the animals and the wealth and every opportunity, essentially never adopted them at all. Two of the most ruthlessly practical military cultures in history looked at this weapon and said no. And the states that said yes kept saying yes for 2,000 years. The answer is that the elephant was never the product. Go back to Troutman's observation, because it is the hinge of the whole subject. Because elephants cannot economically be bred, they must be captured. Because they must be captured, somebody has to own and protect the forest they come from. Which means, running backwards, a war elephant corps is not the output of a weapons program at all. It is the visible end of a chain that begins with a state holding wild land out of cultivation, permanently, at a loss, and policing it against everyone who wants to farm it, log it, or hunt in it. Kings did not keep elephants because they had forests. They kept forests because they wanted elephants, and the forest was the actual asset. And that is only half of it. Look at what the animal announces on the day. Any king can show you an army. Armies are countable, and everybody has one, and the enemy can count yours as easily as you count his. What no king can show you, standing on a battlefield, is his granary. And that is the thing that actually decides who survives a long war depth of surplus. The ability to feed people who are not producing food. The elephant makes the granary visible. 4 tons of animal that has been consuming a farmer's annual output every few weeks for 20 years without plowing a furrow, growing a grain, or carrying a cargo. It is a walking audit. When it steps onto the field, the other side is not primarily learning that you have a big animal. They are learning that your kingdom generates enough spare food to have wasted 2 decades of it on this. Nobody can fake that. You cannot borrow it, you cannot bluff it, and unlike mercenaries, you cannot hire it for 1 season. Which finally explains the man with the chisel, and I want to point at this, because it stabs the picture we opened with. That tool is an admission. The operators knew. They knew this animal would sometimes fail, would sometimes turn, would sometimes have to be destroyed in the first 10 minutes in front of the whole army. They budgeted for that, packed a hammer, and bought the elephant anyway. There is only one way that is rational. The return was never entirely on the battlefield. You feed it every day. It fights one afternoon, and the feeding, the visible, extravagant, unrecoverable feeding, was the point all along. The afternoon was the receipt. Which leaves the last question, and for most assets in this series, it is the ugliest one. How do you get out? Start with the buyer pool, because it is almost comically small. To take a war elephant off your hands, a buyer needs standing forage, purpose-built stabling, veterinary knowledge, and drivers, and the drivers are the killer, because the animal answers to a specific man it has known for years. You are not selling a machine with a manual. You are selling a relationship, and the relationship is not transferable. Every kingdom that quits the elephant business shrinks that pool further, and the pool only ever moves one way. Time to sell? You are not thinking in months. The animal has a working life of 4 to 5 decades. It will comfortably outlive the war that justified it, the king who authorized it, and probably the strategic situation that made it look sensible. The forage bill runs the entire time. Recovery on your improvements is close to 0. And this is where the artifacts become almost painful to look at. 8,000 plates of armor, fitted to one animal's body, tusk blades sized to one animal's tusks, a tower built for one animal's back. Every kilo of that investment is bespoke, and bespoke means it recovers nothing. The suit in Leeds outlasted its elephant by 400 years and has never fitted another one. And comparables? There are none. There is no price list for war elephants anywhere in the ancient record, no market rate, no going price, nothing a lender could have valued. The single clearest transaction we have is Seleucus paying in provinces, which tells you the asset was priced by negotiation between 2 men, once, in a situation that never repeated. So what does the exit actually look like when it happens? Rome shows us, and it is not flattering. In 55 BC, Pompey put around 20 elephants into the arena as spectacle. They died badly, and Pliny records that they seemed to appeal to the crowd, and the crowd, remarkably, turned. Not on the elephants, on Pompey. Cicero, who was there, wrote that the audience felt something like kinship with the animals. That is the terminal value of a war elephant in a state that has stopped wanting them. entertainment, briefly, at a reputational cost to the man liquidating. You only ever needed one buyer. The trouble is you have no idea when he arrives, and the animal eats 150 kilos a day while you wait, none of which makes the romance false. The wall of animals at Ipsus really did stop the best cavalry in the world and redraw the map. The shock really did break real lines. Kings who bought these things were not fools chasing a legend, they were buying a real effect, with real evidence behind it, using the best information they had. The dream was accurate. The accounting was just standing somewhere they were not looking. And the accounting says something specific. Every kingdom that had to import its elephants, Egypt, Carthage, Epirus, the Seleucids running their long resupply east eventually stopped. Every kingdom that sat on the forest kept going for another 2,000 years. Same animal, same tactics, same counter-tactics. The difference was never military, because you could ship the animal. You could ship the armor, the ships, the drivers, the entire apparatus of the hunt. Nobody ever worked out how to ship the forest. Next time, an asset that cost a fortune to build, produced nothing for its owner, and made its money entirely from people who were forbidden to refuse it.